Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Jeremy Schumacher. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm the Jer in Wellness with Jer. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel today. Today, we're going to have a bunch of uncomfortable conversations about a show that came out in 2019 that was oddly relevant at the time. And it's still relevant today because we keep putting people in charge who haven't studied or learned from history at all. So that's fun. The topic for today is a miniseries by HBO that won a ton of awards that I avoided for years. One, because I didn't have HBO, but even once I got HBO, I still didn't want to watch it because it came out during COVID, and it was a lot of reminders about COVID stuff. And in my personal opinion, which is informed by my professional role, certainly, but I do think the loss of life and everything else that happened during COVID, political schisms and family dramas that played out everywhere we haven't recovered from that yet. And so, the intergenerational trauma, that'd be really interesting. And I think that's why this topic in this show was something that I wasn't sure if I was going to do a review. I honestly just set out to watch it for fun because it was very well received. And I was surprised at how many big names were in it that I wasn't aware of. So if you're unfamiliar, Chernobyl was a 5-episode series on HBO. It was written by Craig Mazin. Jared Harris is in it. You would know him if you saw him. If you don't recognize the name, he won a bunch of awards. Stellan Skarsgård, who you would know from a ton of stuff, as just Skarsgårds are everywhere. But I did a review of Andor. He plays a real big role in Andor. You know him from other stuff. Jesse Buckley, who feels like is everywhere at the moment. Barry Keoghan, the weird looking fella from Killing of Sacred Deer and everything else. I haven't watched the new Peaky Blinders movie, but he's in that. So again, like 2019 HBO has that premiere television where like somebody will be on something in sort of a minor role, and then you'll see them everywhere years later, and then you'll go back and watch this older thing and be like, oh, look at everybody was in that. So that's sort of how I felt about this. But Chernobyl is about the nuclear disaster in 1986. The episodes sort of tell an asynchronous story. It sets out a couple years after the disaster and then goes back in time to explain it. And the psychology of it is really interesting. One, because again, I think, 2026, we're coming up on 30, 40 years, Jared, do math. Coming up on 40 years for this. There's a war going on in Ukraine right now, and the like outer shell was damaged. I don't think that was this war. I think that was in the past. But again, like this is an active and ongoing thing. Like the protective shell that's around Chernobyl is still there and exists. There's a ton of conspiracy theories still out and about everything that happened. There's some unsolved things. A nuclear reactor event like this is something that will go on for more than any of us will be around to deal with. And so when you look at something like intergenerational trauma, this is like a very, I'm going to say like hard copy, like a tactile sort of physical version of it, where we have this physical thing, the protective shell that will be at Chernobyl for ages because of the way that some of these elements exist and remain radioactive for a long time. So the show is dramatized. It's gotten both a lot of praise and a lot of criticism for how accurate it was. It certainly took some storytelling liberties. It's funny to me, again, sort of the psychology of it. The tagline and one of the most stick with you sort of moments in the show is, what are the cost of lies? And like human lives, right? Like when the state, when the government, when those in power are lying, regular people die. I think the show did a really good job of that. And so whether that's what was going on with COVID when the show came out, the show obviously didn't know about COVID, like filmed and created and produced all before that. It came out in May. Um, it came out a year before COVID. Where are we at? Time's so strange. It came out before COVID. Um, I just didn't have HBO back then. All Elite Wrestling wasn't on HBO, so I didn't have the reason to. Time's been strange since COVID. And again, I think that's a bunch of millennials for sure. Perhaps we're just getting old, but I think a lot of people have that frame of reference that like time's been weird for the past 6 years. They think the ongoing trauma of a decade plus of Donald Trump has been helpful. But again, like you sort of have these things that shift and change. 31 people, the USSR credited Chernobyl with the direct cause of death. It's been posited that up to 93,000 people died from it, from exposure and other things that happened with it. An increase in cancer rates, especially among children, an increase in birth defects, especially like obviously among children in the countries surrounding this. And so this was like an international issue that state government, the USSR at the time, tried to lie about and tried to cover up because of political expediency. And the disaster itself likely was caused by inefficiency and ineptitude by people in charge who really shouldn't have been, again, for political expediency. Why was it set up poorly? Because it was cheaper. Again, another fictionalized but very poignant part of the series is at the end where they're showing a trial that not everybody who's shown in the trial was there, but again, sort of the idea that this was known. So the reactors that the USSR was using at the time had a flaw that was known, and the state, the show, I don't know how accurate this is, right? I'm not a historian, I'm a therapist. A scientist wrote about this, and then the scientist wasn't heard from again, sort of suggested the state disappeared him. Could have happened. I'm not saying it didn't. I'm saying I did not fact check for this review. And there hadn't really been an issue until, like a decade later. And so this known issue was known and the state covered it up. And then a bad thing happened and a bunch of things needed to fall disastrously into place for the bad thing to happen. But it did. It did through incompetence of people who were on the ground and running the show. They were supposed to be doing a safety test. They ignored a bunch of precautions. Perhaps some people who were working the shift, it was supposed to happen during the day shift. It didn't happen because of a power outage elsewhere. The communication to the night shift or the second shift didn't really happen. So you have people who weren't prepped or trained on this, running it. You have people who were, the show tells it as looking out for themselves and getting promotion. As people would move up in the government, other roles would become available. And loyalty was seen as a plus, right? And so, again, for our modern sort of times where we have former Fox News host as our Secretary of Defense, like that's not great. When you put propagandists in charge of things, bad things happen. And so you have sort of these state these state officials, state writ large, right? Like for the country. These politicians in places of power where really you would want people who are more well educated. And I think that's going to keep getting worse. Call me cynical, call me getting old, but I don't think The Rock is going to run for political office, but if he did, like, he would win. Like, we don't vote for people who have great records anymore in the military or astronauts or physicists and PhDs and other people. We vote for reality TV stars. We vote for the people who do really well on TikTok or, can do the debate bro thing on YouTube. Like, it's not great. So again, like a lot of uncomfortable parallels between what was going on in 1986 in the USSR and what's going on in the US today. Certainly possible. Uh, that's because we have a compromised president from a couple different countries, presumably. Going a little tinfoil hat, but I don't think that's that outlandish to suggest at this point. Um, so yeah, they have the safety test they're supposed to run. It gets bungled from the get-go. It had failed 3 or 4 times previously. They try and power through. What basically happens is they overheat and like vaporize a bunch of the water that's designed to cool down the reactor. A steam explosion happens, which everyone is thrown off by because they're like, a nuclear reactor can't explode, which in my reading of Wikipedia, which is not a reliable source on higher level things like nuclear fission, seems genuinely impossible. So some of the people who were depicted in the show as denying the reality of the situation may have been well informed to know that what they were being told happened could not happen. And that is true because the reactor didn't explode, the steam exploded, and it exposed the reactor, which is still really, 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 really catastrophic and bad. You don't want those nuclear materials out in the open, which is how a lot of people died, right? Like a bunch of the firefighters who responded to the fire because the building itself was on fire. They needed to put the roof fire out so that there are multiple reactors. So that reactor 3 is where the accident happened. They needed to protect reactor 4. So a lot of those people who were first responders died because there wasn't really a communication or anything about that. They were trying to, again, like the denial on the ground made things worse. And then like the state came in and people who were less involved in the running of the system at Chernobyl, the power plant, and more on the political side of things definitely made it worse. And again, if you've ever been around a crisis situation, I think you'll be able to relate to the idea that there are people who are super helpful on the ground, and then there are like bureaucrats who are really unhelpful. And bureaucracy is really not needed, full stop. But definitely not needed in a crisis situation. Like the red tape that can happen and some of that stuff really gets in the way of health and wellness. And at the same time, the bureaucracy, I wouldn't even call it bureaucracy, just sort of extra steps, the red tape, the structure of safety planning around something like nuclear fission is super needed. And so there's nuance and there's a balancing act here for like what should have happened. But it does seem to be well agreed upon that the idea that these issues were known and the state covered it up and ignored it and didn't empower people who were well informed to do preventative measures. That seems well agreed upon. And the people on the ground, the people running the plant that night made a bunch of errors and mistakes as well. And both those things can be true at the same time, right? So you sort of have the planets aligning in a mishap sort of way where all these things that could go wrong did go wrong, and the dominoes being in place to knock each other down disastrously. And so again, I mean, what's the cost of lies? Like whether it's state censorship, whether it's the state being anti-science, whether it's political affiliation and loyalty being rewarded over merit, all of these things are still going on in countries across the world, not just here, but also definitely here. The idea that like RFK is the head of human health and services and Dr. Oz has a job in the administration is like reprehensible. The corruption we're seeing just out in the open at a major scale is unheard of. There's a part of history that we learn here as Americans called the Gilded Age, and like we've blown that out of the water with what's going on now. So, you know, it's a deeply uncomfortable watch to see sort of the government lie to its people, and the people have to pay the price. Again, you see a mother who loses a baby because of this. The show does sensationalize how many people died from the event itself just by like going outside and watching it. But like there's a scene where like kids are playing in sort of the ash and everything, and like that isn't good. And again, then you go online and you're seeing reels and videos of black rain falling down in Iran because the oil fields are being bombed. And so again, intergenerational trauma is a thing that gets coded into our DNA and has real fallout for people's mental health, for people's physical health too, right? Like we know that stress in utero, we know that some of that stress can lead to less dense bones, teeth that are more likely to develop cavities or fall out. There's a bunch of like general, actual physical health issues. And then the mental, emotional component of like hypervigilance and the trauma, the moral injury of people who are supposed to be looking out for you and keeping you safe, actually harming you, which again, it's like good to be aware that the state isn't providing for you. It is harming you. In late stage capitalism, it's extracting wealth, not providing basic goods and services, which is really what the state should be about. And again, the Skarsgård, Sherbina is his name. That character, again, sort of this lackey, this politician who's just doing political things. He gets in the way a little bit, and as he sort of spends time on the ground and is with these different scientists, he starts to take it seriously. And so you will see people rise to the occasion in these types of things. I say to my clients all the time, I do not see a lot of good leaders. My clients who are switching jobs, looking for new jobs, have jumped professions or career paths. I just hear over and over again how many bad leaders are out there, how many people aren't good at being in charge. And I think that is a real failing because there's a skill set to it, but it's not innate, right? And so if a lot of people could approach leadership differently, and I think there's a whole like school of thought around like leadership trainings, and those are all done really poorly. And I roll my eyes at that too. Like, don't go get your associate's degree in like leadership training. That's all bullshit too. There's a lot of science and research around active leadership and appreciative organizations and collaborative leadership, and there's great examples out there. It's just that's not what works well in late stage capitalism. So until we divest from our big overarching system of how we organize civilization, bad leaders are going to continue to exist because promotions are based on like money as opposed to skill set. So it's infuriating. And again, I mean, there's a character who is made up for the miniseries. I'm getting all the names wrong because I didn't just watch the series. I mean, I watched it like last week, but I'm bad at pronouncing things to begin with. Komyuk, Ilana Komyuk is like a composite of like 20 different scientists into one character, but she wasn't around the explosion. She was a country away, and where she was reading the nuclear fallout from this. And so again, the USSR wanted to cover this up and deny anything had happened until other countries were saying, no, like our readings are off the chart. Something definitely happened. And then they started to take it seriously because there was the threat of losing face in the midst of the Cold War. Gorbachev has said that the Chernobyl reactor disaster is what led to the fall of the USSR, which I think is an oversimplification in a lot of ways as not a professional historian. And yeah, like this was a huge blunder, and that like power and like deserving respect through like authoritarian control is so very fragile, right? We saw it in, I mentioned Andor earlier, we see it in, you know, Hegseth in the United States here, like refusing to let certain outlets take pictures of him because he doesn't want a bad photo op. Like, that's not leadership, you know, as we commit war crimes across the world. So yeah, but the show for its various inaccuracies, like Komyuk is again this approximation of a couple different, like up to like 20 different people, because a lot of people knew this was an issue. The scientific community had been speaking out about this for a long time, and the state ignored it, right? We had a disaster prevention plan in place, and the state got rid of it because they didn't like the guy who created it, right? And like that's racist, but also just like incredibly short-sighted and stupid. And what happens when you continue to put people in charge who are not well educated, people who do not have both the leadership qualities and any sort of like foresight, this is what happens, right? Like you can only tolerate so many bad people in positions of power before bad things start happening. And almost always not to them, right? It's the firefighters, it's the mothers, it's the regular people who have to deal with this. The show shows like these sort of engineers who have to go into the basement to release the water to keep from another explosion, which the show overemphasizes. Um, but that's a real thing that happened. It wasn't this dramatic drawing of straws to see who might die, but it was like who happens to be on the shift, just a regular ass worker having to go down in the basement because they knew how it worked, and their flashlights burned out right away because of the radiation, and they had to use hand pump flashlights, and that's a very stressful episode arc to follow for them to release this water to keep from another steam explosion from happening. So yeah, the show was incredibly stressful. Incredibly stressful because like watching it years later, you want to be like, don't do that, right? And knowing what happened and having that hindsight, you're like, well, obviously something bad just happened. So you're watching the people in the room ignore that the reactor's exposed. There's like, that can't happen. And like, again, obviously it can. It is happening. So what are we doing? And when you are high on your own supply or you're just in the business of propaganda, sometimes you fall, into that trap of like, well, I said so people will believe me and it won't cause any harm. And it's like, yeah, no, it does. If we Trump 1.0 with COVID was if we stop testing people, we don't know how many people are there. It's like, yeah, that makes for an okay headline if numbers are down, but if people keep dying at incredible rates, that's not going to go away, right? And so wealth inequality is not going to go away. Gas prices rising, humanitarian aid being slashed, like the horrors that are being done right now to play well to a particular political base is, again, like we just need a whole new system. If you're not doing something that improves the lives of the next like 3 or 4 generations, if you're not looking forward to the future of humanity but are only thinking about yourself, like you should be nowhere near power. And we have a system that rewards that psychotic selfishness, and that's not great. So but the show does a good job of sort of showing the nurses doing work, the scientists doing work, and paying the cost, right? Not getting jobs in the future, being blacklisted for those things. Like that's what happens in the real world to whistleblowers. It's what happens to people who are doing good work and are experts and don't sort of follow like a political line or a sensational headline and just follow the science. Is sometimes that's unpopular. Oftentimes that's unpopular, right? Because again, our whole system isn't designed to be beneficial to humanity as a whole. It's designed to be unnecessarily competitive and reward awful people. The miners digging under to have a cooling system to avoid a yet another threat of another explosion. And again, like just regular people, right? There was this sense of pride at the time that wasn't inflated by ego of politicians, but was like, no, we're hard workers. We do the thing. Like, if you need to get it done, we'll get it done. In the Midwest, sort of the idea is like, if your friend asks for help, you help them. If your neighbor needs help, you help them. Like that idea of it could be a blizzard, it could be whatever, it could be a power outage. Like research shows that in times of crisis, humans are more altruistic. We come together naturally. Communities stand up for each other and support each other, which always cracks me up for like the hate mongering that politicians do. Again, like we have 50 years of unfettered propaganda here in America leading to the current schism in how people respond to reality, honestly. And that's been a long time coming, and all it takes is a tornado brushing through a town for the town to come together. And I'm not saying like tornadoes are good. I'm just saying that like that propaganda works when enough of our basic necessities are accounted for that we can blame other people, that we can sit around and consume media. But when we can't do that, when the power is out, when we need help and we are helping other people get to safety, we're naturally altruistic. It's hardwired into our systems as Homo sapiens. Like, we as communal creatures survived not because we're like fast, because we're not. We have endurance, which is rare because we can sweat. So next time you see me with my arms up in a video and you can see my pit stains, that's evolution at work, keeping our species alive, that ability to sweat. I have hyperhidrosis, so I am a sweaty person on top of that. Just overactive sweat glands, unrelated to a nuclear disaster. The other thing so like the nurses, the miners, the scientists are all sort of like shown. And then we have the liquidators. And the liquidators for Chernobyl, that phrase is sort of a catch-all for a ton of different people. Like 600,000 different people were conscripted into service. Some of them had to go house to house and get perishable food items out so it wouldn't rot and contribute to other disease. Some people went around, and this is shown in the show, went around and had to kill all the animals. Pets, dogs, cats, everything. And like just like a genuinely horrific toll. I can't, as a therapist, posit how bad that must be for your mental health, for that to be your job. Because these things were radioactive, right? And so they were going to continue to be harmful and potentially die horrific deaths themselves. And so this was a humane thing to do, and also like psychologically horrific. And again, I think the show didn't show that. Obviously it couldn't, but like showed it in a way that like captured the horror of this. For media and things that showed the horrors of war, this is like the horrific fallout of leaders not taking care of their people and putting their own sort of desired perception above health and safety. And yeah, just horrific. There's a scene after they finally convinced the politicians to evacuate the town where Chernobyl was in. There's like a scene where a dog is chasing one of the buses they're getting people out of the city on, and like that's very sad. And then like 2 episodes later, the liquidators are going through and having to kill all the animals. And like, just brutal. And again, there's this perspective that could be like pulling on your heartstrings because we all like dogs. Most of us like dogs. We all should like dogs. And I'm obviously a dog person. And the reality is again, that show, the show did some of that, yes, for like the emotional heartstrings, but also because like we're mammals, right? We're self-aware primates. We're not different from the dogs that are affected by this. We're not different than the trees that were affected by this, the land, the soil, all of this stuff. Like, we're part of Earth. And so a natural disaster like this that could have been preventable is an us problem, right? Global warming, climate change is an us problem. The idea that we're so dependent on oil still that we're having another war about it, when like we should have shifted to cleaner energy in 2000 when Al Gore won the presidency. And again, I'm not like that would have solved everything, but I do think, again, like, we've had opportunity to divest from oil for a long time and continue to not, because it makes certain people really wealthy. And so, yeah, I mean, these are fixable things. I think these are things that Gen Z is growing up having to deal with differently than even I as a millennial had to deal with. We sort of had like the hole in the ozone layer in the late 90s, and we did fix that because, again, at the time, you could have scientists go and say, hey, this is a problem, we should fix it. And like, we fixed it. And then you have people like Matt Walsh being like, that was a hoax. Like, no, it wasn't. Vaccines work really well. And the problem with vaccines is within a couple of generations, when a disease is eradicated, people think, I don't need vaccines because they are so far removed from that. And that's the other piece with intergenerational trauma, is like, I think it's there, and it's a couple generations. I'm not saying it works its way out of our DNA, but I am saying like it can really affect, 3, maybe 4 generations. And then like people are different enough, and society and the world that we live in and our day-to-day experience changes enough where, I don't know, people think they know better. And in a lot of ways, we do know a lot more than any of our ancestors ever did. And in a lot of other ways, again, like it has to be both, right? We talk about, um, people talk about two-eyed seeing as sort of understanding modern technology and scientific learning and having an awareness and appreciation for indigenous and ancestral knowledge that, like, yeah, I mean, people built the pyramids, right? Like, people have been using plants for medicine for millennia. And yes, it's great that we can make things in a lab now and we can synthesize some of these things and we can do all this different stuff. And we're still like blowing each other up over oil for money. So I don't know. We could be better for sure. And the takeaway from Chernobyl, I think that was really horrific for me is like we didn't learn anything, right? Putin, who is now, running several different wars and also like vast, incredible misinformation campaigns, took the wrong message away from that, right? Not that we need to work to make the world a better place for all people, but that like we need to be better at lying to protect our power. If only we had lied more, then what? Like, then what? The USSR would have never fallen, but like more people would have died. So, this is this horrific thing. And within the span of a year or two, 31 people had died. More have died since then. And certainly it caused a lot more harm than that number details. But like we had over 1 million deaths in the United States during COVID. Like, again, I think the scale of the loss and the damage done is going to be haunting. Um, I will say the Chernobyl soundtrack was phenomenal. It really added to the stress and then the hauntingness of it. So shout out, I forget who did the soundtrack. It was somebody who's worked with Throbbing Gristle. Why do I know that? Because I listen to weird music. I forget who. I'll find it somewhere. Hildur, I found it, but far be it for me to be able to pronounce a name that is that Icelandic. Gontadur. If you just sort of meld your consonants together, it's not so apparent that you're bad at pronouncing things. But yeah, soundtrack was incredible. It's a beautiful show. Again, I think if you think about premiere television and like HBO miniseries, like that is what you come to expect. The overall sort of question on like what's the cost of lies. Again, like I think the show told lies and owned that it told lies. It's in like the it's not post-credit scenes, but the like a documentary will have sort of like the updates since they finished filming. The miniseries has some of those like updates and like who died when and what happened with this and blah blah blah. And it owned that like Komyuk was like made up. And so it puts out some of the truth, but I think the lies it told was to get to a larger truth about humanity, about mankind, about like, did we learn our lessons or not? And the answer is no. And they needed to dramatize it because people don't change their minds in the face of facts and logic and evidence. People change their mind based on emotions. And so sometimes you need something like this. Sometimes that more idea of like a story or an oral history that has life and feeling to it is what's going to affect people. And so sadly, the nuclear disaster wasn't enough to get global governments together. The pandemic wasn't enough. This miniseries certainly not enough to get the terrible people who are in charge of too many places to learn their lesson because they lack empathy. But that's a entirely separate video on how most leaders that we elevate are psychopaths. I'm using that word as the licensed professional. They've done research on it. Yeah, but Chernobyl's like fantastic. Like as stressful and unpleasant as it is to watch, it's beautifully made. It's wonderfully crafted. It's really interesting. I read a ton of stuff, books on hold at the library and other things to like get more facts and information on it because it really is fascinating. But that time capsule piece of it was really historically accurate, even if they needed to dramatize other of stories of it. But fascinating. I mean, I watched it in like 2 days. It's a quick watch, 5 episodes. It's enthralling and stressful. So, you know, my recommendation is to watch it in the sense that, like, yes, there are pieces that are historically very accurate. There are pieces that are historically inaccurate, and I think it does speak to a wider issue that is accurate for humanity. So, really good. I really enjoyed it. I don't know that I'll watch it again unless I'm watching it with somebody who hasn't watched it because it is stressful and kind of unpleasant. But it's unpleasant because, again, we didn't learn our lesson more than like the show itself is unpleasant. The show's very stressful, but very well made. So check that out. I'm just becoming a shill for HBO, but it's really the only place I watch stuff anymore. So if you would like to hear me talk about something else, drop down in the comments and let me know. If you want to meet me, hey, hi, I'm a real person. You can drop down in the show note or in the description here for a link to a retreat I have coming up. And yeah, do all those YouTubey things, like, subscribe. That helps more people find me and connect. Ta-da! We did it. Yo, the world's on fire in a lot of different ways. You got to take care of yourself and then take care of other people, because the only way to get through this is in community. So without further ado, take care of yourself, take care of somebody else. Peace.